Hi, everybody, and welcome to our regularly scheduled SIG Usability meeting. Today we have Brian Grant, who's going to talk about a project he's been working up on upstream that he'll do a deeper dive into in our next meeting. And we have Cora Coleman, who has been working on a Kubernetes study for some time that we've sort of helped her with in the past just to get more folks participating. And she's going to give us a little update and tell us what the next phase of that is. So to kind of get started, Brian was wondering what the SIG is kind of interested in right now. So I'm going to briefly share our jobs to be done project plan. Now, this is something that we've been working on for about a year and a half at this point. And so jobs to be done studies are where we do really in-depth interviews of users of Kubernetes to understand what they're trying to accomplish, what jobs they're trying to accomplish when they're using Kubernetes. And then from doing a synthesized, basically going in and tagging the individual jobs that they mention during their user interview, we then come up with a list of Kubernetes jobs that we can then use to inform us to do a deeper dive into how Kubernetes is helping people do their jobs. And from that, we can understand where we might need to more deeply invest in the user experience in order to help them do the original job that they were trying to do with Kubernetes. So we are at a point where we have all 12 of our user interview transcripts done and tagged, and now we need to basically do the initial groupings, and then from that, we have the list of jobs that we then turn into the survey that we can use with a much larger group of people.
Are these jobs categorized by role at all, or are they a mix?
So we had, yeah, they are somewhat segmented by like who we were talking to, but when we were interviewing people, we were very specific that we wanted to talk to people who were users of Kubernetes, not builders of Kubernetes, because we were kind of targeting that user base versus the builder base.
So people deploying applications as opposed to people building platforms?
No, these are people using Kubernetes itself. So not as high as the application layer, but in the middle. Like I am the person who's deploying Kubernetes, but I don't actually build. Does that make sense? Like, so kind of separating like folks in upstream from consumers of upstream. I'm building a platform with Kubernetes, but I'm not like actively building.
I see. So not contributors to Kubernetes, but any other type of user.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so people who are in the guts of the Kubernetes, right? Like, so not like just I deploy an application and try not to think about it, but not like as far upstream as the rest of us. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple milestones that we have hit, and then I need to re-engage the folks who are finishing up the synthesis. So I think everyone has actually finished their synthesis, and now we just need to pull it all together. So that is where we are right now. And so I think kind of to answer your meta point, Brian, the folks who have been actively contributing to SIG usability so far are really user researchers and user designers, and they've been contributing their research capabilities as we've been doing the jobs to be done study. We have had other folks come in who wanted to spearhead different efforts that are more broadly under the usability umbrella, but they haven't really gotten anything going. So the main thing we've been doing is this research effort.
So doing almost anything realistic with Kubernetes requires using additional tools. Does the study encompass those things like configuration tools, deployment tools, GitOps tools, observability tools, operators? Like what is the scope with respect to that? I assume it's not just kube control.
No, yeah. So I can pull up the data. We have, so we never open sourced the interviews themselves because people gave us a lot of their time and were very frank with us. And so we want to anonymize the results before we put all of the data in the public sphere. But yeah, it was really just trying to understand, and this is sort of a user research capability that we thought was really cool because it's never been done in upstream before. It's used internally at a lot of organizations, but a jobs to be done study done in upstream had never been done before. And so it was really just trying to understand as you use these tools, what job are you trying to get done? Because then that way you can kind of try and tease out if the original job they were trying to get done is actually getting done or not by the tools that they have. And so that was really the focus. I can dig up all of the raw data, but I don't have it open on my laptop right now.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So just kind of, yeah.
Super interesting. I was wondering about like with the jobs to be done.
Yeah.
Do any of them also kind of cover like, because I know sometimes you need to get familiar with the tool that you're using, or to accomplish a job, you need to kind of like familiarize yourself with Kubernetes a bit or the tool you're using. So did that at all come up in like, I guess like onboarding or training at all, like for these users and the resources they use to do that?
Yeah. So here, I think this is, I actually not totally sure which are public and which are not, but let me share this link with you. So just to be transparent, my co-chair was driving this and she recently stepped down for maternity leave. So that's why I'm a little like bleh. But here is the project plan that we worked on together. And you can kind of see here, the questions are, who are the main users? What are they achieving, trying to achieve, and how does Kubernetes fit into it? How are they going about so, and what are the top opportunities for improving Kubernetes? And so then we kind of go into the methodology. So what we're looking at is define the users, end user, product lifecycle support team, and purchase decision maker. Define the core functional jobs. So like here, it's like job statement equals verb plus noun. So like I am trying to cut wood in a straight line, right? Like, so, and then from there, break down the core jobs into steps. So this is like your ideal process flow, and then looking at how I define, locate, prepare, confirm, execute, monitor, modify, and conclude. And then we want to find out like kind of what you're trying to dig to is like, what was their desire? Like when they started on this journey, what is actually the desired outcome of all of this? And then then phase 2 is what we're trying to kind of dive into now. So like phase 1 is functionally complete. And now what we're really trying to do is get into the phase where we can quantify opportunities using user data. So for example, back up with like, using the desired outcome statements and typing questions, we can create this survey that, right now we've just done 12 deep dives. This would be something you can send out to like 100+ people and get to like how important it is that the desired outcomes we uncovered from the more in-depth study are achieved to a wider group of people, how well their current situation satisfies what they're trying to do, and then get profiling questions to understand what factors are currently causing complexity and making some people struggle more than others. Cool. So as you can kind of see, like we got pretty far and now just need to kind of push it into phase 2. So that's where we are right now. And we've done a couple sort of deep dives at our KubeCon sessions over the past couple of years, where there's one where Carl, who was a user researcher, I think initially at Red Hat, and then he was at Apple, and now he's moved on to a new role, I think at Facebook, or maybe it was the other way around. But this is kind of what he does all day. And so he really helped us define it from the quantification perspective and the data-driven analysis. And then we had a bunch of user designers who had never done a jobs to be done study, who were so Carl put together an entire presentation on how to do the nuts and bolts of the actual jobs to be done job analysis. And so that's what folks have been following as they get onboarded. That being said, we have wanted to sort of verify people before we give them access to the data, just because it does have personal stuff in there. So that's why we haven't like blasted this. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. Hopefully we're going to finish phase 2 this summer. And then once we do that, then we'll have some really interesting data that we can start sharing more broadly. But Brian, do you want to kind of chat about what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So actually something good for me to know for next time is whether I can present or I need to be co-host or something.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Let's see.
All right, so I think I shared a window. Could be wrong. But yeah, and what we're building is this approach I call configuration as data, which allows us to programmatically manipulate configuration in its kind of native Kubernetes YAML form, more or less. And the interesting thing about it is it's not manipulating the data in the Kubernetes API server the way most of our tools do, like kubectl, the Kubernetes dashboard, and so on, but actually manipulating the data in storage. So right now we have support for Git, but we are adding support for additional storage backends. And what that enables is management of configurations similar to what people kind of do manually in Git today. So this is about a version that's about a month old, but what I have here is it shows Git repositories that are registered. We have a blueprint repository and what we call a deployment repository. And just like you could create Kubernetes resources through the Kubernetes dashboard or some other dashboard or UI for Kubernetes, we can actually create blueprints and deployments from those blueprints. So you can actually create repeatable deployments, multiple variants of a deployment, much like you could with configuration tools. So the alternative is to use one of the 100 or more configuration tools that exist for Kubernetes, like Helm or Customize or CDK-S or Starlard, DAL, Qling, et cetera. And what people do is they write those files by hand because they're in code or some kind of template code-like format. So what those end up looking like, hopefully you can see this, is something like this. So this is a Helm template for a role binding, or actually for an arbitrary number of role bindings that can be specified in the values.yaml file. So here we basically see every field parameterized pretty much. Over time, this gets more complicated because in order to preserve backward compatibility, people also conditionalize every new line they add to the Helm template. So even the simplest object in Kubernetes is the namespace, and even that can look pretty complicated to be able to specify. Here's an example of a conditional for, if there are labels specified, then insert all the labels here. You can also get into examples that do YAML formatting and quoting and things like that. So it can get even more complex than this. I will note that this doesn't have annotations in it. So if you wanted to add annotations to your namespace, you would have to go edit this template before you could add the values to your values.yaml file. And that's pretty common, I find, is that users often can't just be consumers of configuration templates. They end up having to be authors of the configuration templates because there's something that they need from the template. So here's an example of defaulting and quoting, for instance. There's something they need that wasn't actually specified in the template itself. So they need to go edit the template and add, the new attribute they need or the new field they need before they can add it to their values.yaml. Now, values.yaml is in a format that could be machine edited potentially. It's a nested map, which is a pretty simple format. It's convenient for merging multiple values.yaml files. I don't see a lot of tooling around that. However, people tend to edit these things by hand. So you have to know what values exist and what the nested structure of this file is. So here we see multiple namespaces specified, for instance. And Helm 3 did add some validation support. So if you specify the schema, the values.yaml, then it can do some validation, or you can build tools that do some validation potentially. But then, if you want to add a resource, then you also need to, or if you want to add an attribute to the template, then you also need to add it to the schema, and that's more work. So I don't see a lot of people doing that yet. So anyway, the alternative that I proposed was instead of building this into some sort of templates with some sort of templating language or configuration language or general purpose language like TypeScript or something, we can do this the way we build tools for the Kubernetes API itself. So that's what we did. And what that enables me to do is to just edit this. I'll just say, I'll just create a simple namespace blueprint. And I'll just call it the simple namespace blueprint. So I'll go ahead and do that. And this is a pretty simple UI. I was the UX designer more or less. So you can imagine providing step-by-step guidance, progressive disclosure, whatever UX kind of techniques you can imagine in a traditional UI, you could do in this UI. It's built in a pretty straightforward way. Happens to use Backstage because we thought that would be interesting to the platform building audience, and this is a useful platform kind of mechanism. Service catalogs, Backstage has service catalogs. This is kind of a special purpose catalog mechanism for managing configuration. So this gives us a kind of empty package. What we can do is we can edit the package and we can add resources to it. So I can add a namespace resource, and I could potentially add a label to this. Like, let's say this is just a standard level of privilege, and save that. And pretty much every namespace also needs a role binding. So we can add that, and we'll say this will be a namespace for an app team. So it will be owned by the app admin, and we will refer to a cluster role of type app admin or name app admin. And we'll bind that to a group that has a name of a form that is a convention decided by the platform team. So we'll just call this example is kind of a placeholder for the group. Now we could look at the YAML, and people who are familiar with Kubernetes might want to do that, but we never actually have to look at the YAML. And again, this is kind of a rudimentary UI, but you can imagine, providing a little bit more step-by-step guidance here. So we'll just save that, and we can save that to the blueprint. And I can propose this as a change, and then someone else in the platform team could review this. You can actually take a look at what these resources look like, and they could approve it. Now, we could also add automated validation here. So someone reviewing this might say, well, actually this is not going to work. So in addition to the resources, what we need to add some functions, and the functions are similar to customize transforms. They actually are transformations that will get invoked when we create deployments from this blueprint to create different variants that are customized to the specific purpose that we're trying to use it for. So in this case, we actually need to rename the namespace when blueprints get stamped out. So to do that, we need to add a function to set the name of the namespace. And we're going to set the name of the namespace to the name of the package. Now, we also need to customize the group and the role binding. So we're going to use a replacement, which is a transform borrowed from customize to do that. And we can select, we're taking the value, again, we're going to use the package name, which right now is just a placeholder, and we're going to put it into the role binding. And you see here, we're just selecting values from the blueprint. Okay, so now this should work. So we'll go ahead and save this and repropose it. So the idea here is, instead of editing, templates or code or other complicated text formats, we can actually just build a UI to construct the blueprints. And then we can use the UI to stamp out the blueprints. So I'm going to just go ahead and approve this. Now, if someone wanted to deploy this, they could actually deploy right from here if they were browsing the blueprint, or they could deploy it from the deployment repository. So here's the blueprint I just made, and I'm just going to call this backend 1, and that's basically it. So I can see here that the namespace is called backend 1. The namespace transform did that. The role binding did not get customized correctly, so there was a bug there. But we could also edit resources and customize it on top of the base blueprint here. So anyway, this is kind of the basic, and then this can get deployed with GitOps. So it's kind of all writing to Git. I can show the packages. The blueprint I created was written to Git. So we have a backend that we call the package orchestrator that interacts with Git and can create packages, update packages, delete packages, create derived packages, update those packages from the original upstream package, and so on. And because we have a service doing this, you can do it through UI or through other automation tools. And we actually built a prototype before we started building this that also supported bulk upgrades, for example. So if I created 50 namespaces from the one blueprint, we could update them all automatically if we change the base blueprint. So yeah, the idea here is, again, just kind of getting away from manual editing of these text files and going through the Git process. Is basically you need to fork the original Git repo or create a branch, make your edits, commit them, tag them, push them, get that pull request reviewed and merged. So it's actually a pretty lengthy kind of multi-step process to do that, as opposed to, with this level of automation in the UI, you can click a few buttons and achieve a comparable outcome. So that's kind of it in a how do I stop sharing?
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
Zoom changes all the time. So.
I know. And then sometimes it's right where it always was, and you're like, how'd you get over there? I have that happen too. Cool. Thank you so much for going over that. It reminds me a lot of some designs we did when we were working on vSphere with Tanzu a couple of years ago. So I think it definitely resonates with the personas that you're looking at there.
Yeah, there are multiple roles involved. There's the platform team role that would create the catalog of blueprints, and potentially application teams that would deploy from those blueprints. Yeah, but what this kind of enables is these sorts of tasks, for the most part, people have to do a lot of things by hand using IDs and text editors and Git and tools they use for development. But to make simple configuration changes, if we count the number of steps, it's actually quite large. To do even something fairly trivial like I said, adding annotations to the namespace in the Helm chart, for example, and then adding those to your namespaces through the values.yaml files is actually quite a large number of steps. And in the UI-based approach that I showed, effectively it can be just as easy as manipulating the live state. The workflow, we just assumed people would want to do review and approval. So we added a rudimentary review and approval workflow, but it can really be whatever people want. You could have more automated checks and bypass approvals if it passes the automated checks, for example. You can do pre-deployment validations of various kinds. You can do versioning and undo is something we should be able to show next month. So basically, like Google Docs, you can have a list of past versions and click restore and get back an old version.
That's nice.
And which is not something that Kubernetes supports natively for most resource types. It does for deployments, but in a fairly limited way. It doesn't for namespaces, for example. So people do use Git for that right now, but again, it's kind of more error prone. If you had a non-developer admin or security, someone with a security role who wasn't a full-time developer, or a manager that officially needed to approve releases or something like that, I think this kind of approach would be a much more friendly sort of interface for doing those kinds of things. So right now, it's still pretty early, so we are targeting people who are interested in building this kind of an experience. So one nice thing about this approach, I think, is the work can be amortized over a lot more packages because it's really specific to the resource type more than specific to the package. Mm-hmm. So here we're making it really easy to create new blueprints, for instance, at least that's the goal. So if you wanted to create a blueprint for something else, you just need to create new editors in the UI for the resource types and new transformation functions to perform the kind of customizations that you would need for those types. But really, I see the same kinds of customizations done over and over for every Helm chart, for example, that includes the same kinds of resource types. So I'm pretty confident those will be reusable, highly reusable. So as we build up the library of resource types and functions, then less and less work should be required to create packages for additional use cases.
Yeah, super cool. Well, I'll definitely be interested to see when the versioning thing lands, because that sounds awesome. Yeah.
Yes, I've talked to our team about Control-Z for the cloud. Why can't I do like every other content authoring tool, whether it's for docs or spreadsheets or websites or CAD or whatever, has a common set of capabilities like WYSIWYG and versioning and undo and sharing and save and restore and those kinds of things. But Kubernetes does not. And in general, cloud consoles do not provide those kind of capabilities. But with this kind of an approach, we could, effectively, one reason people don't use UIs is because it's not reproducible. You go through a lot of work to create a Kubernetes cluster, for example, or whatever you're doing, and you've done it once, and now you say, I just want to do something like that again, but a little bit different. And with this, you can basically say, save that as a blueprint, and here's how you tweak it if I want to create another one. And you can automatically transform it. So something we haven't done yet, but I'm pretty confident is possible, is if you created a set of resources manually in your cluster using kubectl or some sort of dashboard, we could potentially provide a way to export those resources and run the same transform functions and create a blueprint from that.
Mm-hmm.
So with no manual work.
Yeah, but I think it's super interesting approach. It reminds me a lot of the design work that we did when we were designing for VI admins versus Kubernetes platform teams, because the vSphere admins really want a UI, and then you also want to have the ability to edit the YAML for the super user. So I think your approach makes a ton of sense, and having it all backed up by version control is like clutch. So yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I've observed when talking to people about it, if they're already using one of these tools like Helm or Customize or whatever, they become kind of desensitized to the amount of work it is to actually use these tools. For example, I talked to a Customize user who is automatically generating all their customization.yaml files. So they already built additional automation to do some similar kinds of things. Or, like if I want to just install a Helm chart that I didn't even write, it's a process where, I may need to fork it and maintain that fork. So then I need to create another branch with patches over the original version. And then I need to create my own values.yaml file and so on. It's actually a bunch of steps before I can even get to the point where I'm going to deploy it. And people are not even aware of that anymore. So if we do some sort of assessment of jobs to be done, I would be interested in kind of objective measures of task productivity.
Yeah.
Like how many discrete steps are involved, how long does it take, that sort of thing. Because I think people don't even realize how much time they just spend redoing these sort of tedious steps over and over again.
Yeah, the folks that we interviewed were very aware of it and frustrated. So it was definitely like they felt pretty comfortable just sharing with us, like, just kind of learning the ecosystem and getting everything running and then keeping up with the tooling and the changes and the upgrades. Like they were struggling. So I definitely think, you see a lot of that. Cool. Well, thank you so much for going over that. If nobody has any additional questions, we can switch over to Cora.
Well, I just guess for next time, is there any particular aspect that I should focus on in the presentation, like the different roles involved, or do more comparison with Helm or less comparison with Helm, or comparison with the Kubernetes dashboard?
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. The folks who are mostly contributing to SIG usability are very, so we have like a bunch of folks who either have worked at Red Hat or have recently left Red Hat. And so like they have a very kind of Red Hat specific view of the world. And then we have folks from sort of a bunch of different ecosystem vendors who are just kind of trying to understand Kubernetes better so that they can do their job like at work better. And so that's kind of why they're getting more into upstream, is to better understand the users and like what people are trying to do. And then they'll kind of bring that back to their perspective at the various companies they're designing for. So you kind of have people from a bunch of different companies who are mostly first time in upstream, like kind of just trying to understand how to participate and how to kind of learn about upstream. So that's kind of how I'd look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was super interesting. Okay, Cora.
Thank you so much, Brian, for presenting that. I'm also interested in kind of these tools and the impact that they have on developers and task productivity, and hear a bit about that. So last summer, let me share my screen. Okay. Present. Okay. So this was a research project I started last summer as part of an internship with the IBM Hybrid Cloud Research Group. And so we looked at different preferences that cloud developers had. And we tried seeing if these preferences aligned with different tasks that they did, like if they preferred to use different tools, if they were working on a different type of task. So we looked at 3 different types of tasks. We looked at CRUD, debugging, and monitoring. And we asked our participants what kind of tool modality. So if it was a CLI, something purely textual, or something with a bit of graphics like an IDE or a web console. And we asked them if they preferred to use that according to a different task. And so there's a lot of yellow here. So a lot of people did say that they preferred to use a CLI for CRUD and debugging, and less so for monitoring, but a lot of people then said web console for monitoring. But this was surprising to us because graphics are super useful, and and CLIs don't really incorporate that a lot. And so it's kind of like, where does this fit into how it's helping people accomplish their tasks? Like, where did those features, because they clearly are important when it comes to something like monitoring. So where did these features fit in? So in prior work, we haven't found a lot of, this was a survey. So in prior surveys that we were looking into, none of them really asked about developer preferences as they vary by the type of task that they're working on. So we looked at kind of the CNCF surveys, these Red Hat OpenShift. This one paper we found was kind of the most similar to like our methodology that we were approaching, but it was more so like using a cloud-based IDE and like how that impacts you working on different programming tasks, but not necessarily different types of programming tasks, just kind of like easier programming tasks and then more challenging ones. I think they were working on different algorithms maybe. And then, so we wanted to help address this gap with the 2-part study where we did like the survey where we looked at, developer preferences across different tasks, and then deep diving a bit more into a comparative user study where we had people working on these tasks in different tools. So these were our research questions. So how do the disparate levels of experience of Kubernetes users specifically impact developer tool preferences, or sorry, Kubernetes and cloud impact developer tool preferences? How does the programming task impact developer tool preferences, and how does the modality impact tool preferences? And we did a developer survey where we recruited 60 participants through the IBM research groups, through SIG groups like this, like usability, and also CLI. With Tasha's help on LinkedIn, we recruited people, and we asked them questions about their level of Kubernetes experience, how frequently they worked on these types of tasks, and their preferred modality. And we found that they frequently work on multiple types of tasks a day. There wasn't a clear majority, but as you can see, a lot of intermediate and experts work on CRUD tasks many times a day, but also monitoring tasks many times a day. And so that was also interesting, just to try and understand, what are the most relevant tasks? So I think that's why the job study is really interesting too, because you guys are all kind of discovering like what are the everyday tasks people are working on, and that was something that we really wanted to better understand. We didn't find a lot of examples out there when we were developing our deeper dive study. We were thinking of a task to have people to do. We wanted to know what they were most frequently doing, and that does impact from I guess more of a designer's perspective. I worked with Nick Mitchell, who's a researcher at IBM. I'm not sure if he's here. he tried to make it today, but I don't think he was able to. So he works more on the design side of this also. And from a designer's perspective, you put a lot of different amounts of effort into designing a CLI or a UI, or something with graphics. And so if somebody's not really using it that much, or if they're using it for a very specific purpose, it'd be interesting to understand that better. And so then we moved on and did a bit of a deeper dive with a comparative user study, and it was very small. And our survey results, we only had 60. We would have liked to have more. And part of what we're doing this summer is we've rewritten the survey, and we'd like to get more responses, and we've added a few more questions in it too, just to get some more data, just to iterate on it a bit, improve it. So we recruited participants through the IBM research groups, and also through the SIG usability groups and CLI, this is for the comparative study, my bad, I'm going too fast. So for a comparative study, it was just these 4 participants from the IBM research groups, and we had them complete a Kubernetes task where they created a list of pods, they found a keyword in the logs, and then they deleted the deployment. And they did this task using the CLI and using the OpenShift console. And we recorded their thoughts. We had them do think aloud as they were completing the task. A lot of people said, oh, I know there's a faster way to do this with the CLI. They couldn't quite remember the command that they needed to quickly accomplish the task. So they had to do it. They had to expend a bit more effort in repeating some commands instead of having a more succinct command. Also had some post-study survey questions. So what tool did you prefer to use? All of them, all of the 4 participants from our comparative study said that they preferred to use the CLI. And how could these tools be improved? So some people some responses for how the kubectl tool could be improved would be improving like other minor problems. So they linked kind of something like an issue with the watch flag that could be super annoying, that hadn't been fixed, and that the syntax was cryptic. And for OpenShift, they said that it would be nice if there was more scripting and automation, maybe plugins. And we also asked them these kind of perceived cognitive burden ratings on a Likert scale from 1 to 7, just to kind of gauge personally how successful they felt as a measure of productivity. And we asked them this for each tool. So how successful were you? How hard did you have to work? How annoyed were you when you were completing this task? And overall, the kubectl got a slightly lower rating than the OpenShift, but this is a very small, it's not a lot of conclusions to be drawn, just more of a kind of a proofing for us to like go through this and see if these metrics make sense for a study, see if the task makes sense to repeat later on more broadly. So, and then in future work, we're refining our survey to be, because our survey initially wasn't vendor neutral either. We had suggestions for, like, for example, this is what a CLI is, but to be published on the Kubernetes website, it needs to be vendor neutral. So making it that, and then publishing our original survey data, and then including the refined survey, and then in future work, this is going to be part of my dissertation at UCSD, where I'm a PhD student right now. So we're going to be working also with the Nautilus project at UCSD. They're like a supercomputer center that is big on Kubernetes, which is great for me because I can go and do some interviews with them. I would really like to do more like deep dives and interviews with Kubernetes developers and understanding their everyday work, and also continuing with the hybrid cloud group at IBM. And then Kui is the project that Nick is working on too. So Kui is kind of like a graphical CLI. So it has some aspects of the UI and some aspects of the terminal, whereby if you list something, if you have a command to list your files, you can then like click on the list of files that it outputs. So it kind of has some like, you can have more options. And so maybe using these findings to inform that redesign, if possible. Yeah, but I'd be really welcome any like feedback, or if anybody has input on like similar studies that have been done, I'd be really interested. And I just like appreciate your time and the space for this. And I appreciate Tasha's help, of course, in helping us get the word out on this study. Yeah.
Cool, awesome overview. I agree with you that like sort of the findings from like what folks are using for different tasks is really interesting. Yeah, do you have any other presentations where you kind of like get into more detail about like how folks responded to those kind of questions?
How folks responded to which questions, sorry?
Oh, so when you were kind of showing beginner, intermediate, expert, and sort of what tooling they preferred for what,
Yeah.
do you have any sort of more in-depth views on that yet?
No, I mean, it's interesting because you would have thought that like a lot of the beginners would have not preferred the CLI. So we only had like 5 beginners give us responses, and like all of them didn't say they preferred the CLI. All of them said they preferred the CLI, which is kind of strange. It's like, what do you mean that has the steeper learning curve than a more graphical tool? You would have thought that like it just like it, yeah. So that was a surprising finding. I'm not really sure why that is. I think we need to collect more responses from beginners to more understand that.
Yeah, I know that from sort of how when we were developing tooling at Chef, system administrators usually really like the CLI, and part of it is just familiarity with that kind of input. The other part that you sometimes find, and this is kind of looking at vSphere, is the availability of training. So for example, the reason like that vSphere admins love the vSphere UI is that they have a lot of extensive training in exactly how to use it. And so they become super users of the UI. And so sometimes it's just how you're onboarding folks into the ecosystem will really, yeah. So anyway, that's just kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because yeah, definitely a lot of like different companies, they have different tool sets, and they onboard people with different things. And something that we also want to look into is like how do people learn to use these tools? Like what kind of resources are you giving people, or how do people learn to do Kubernetes tasks in general? Like what tools are people linking to recommending, endorsing to say like, yes, this is the way that you should do this, or yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, thank you so much for going over that. Really awesome presentation. And yeah, let me know how I can help you this summer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for linking that survey, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the SIG app survey. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a SIG app survey in 2016 and another one in 2018.
Yeah.
I don't know if they've done any since then.
I don't know.
Couldn't find it just by searching around.
Yeah, that was, yeah. This is a really good survey, and they have all their data published really nicely in like a big deck. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so well, MapFarina probably has all the original survey questions and everything.
Yeah.
I think if I were to do another similar survey, I probably would ask more about segregating different types of tasks. You know, for example, I think there were some people responding that they use Terraform, but I'm pretty sure that most people don't use Terraform for app deployment to Kubernetes. But they may use it for, you know, creating Kubernetes clusters themselves or installing cluster services into the clusters, you know, sort of as part of the platform. So it'd be helpful to clarify some of those kinds of things. And there are a bunch of new tools since 2018, like all the GitOps tools were very nascent in 2018, so they weren't widely used. And now they're a lot more widely used. So I think it could be interesting to redo this survey, just see what, you know, how much has changed.
Totally. We one of the questions we added was about automation, like for CRUD debugging monitoring. In addition to which tool modality, we added an option just to use automation. And at the end, we asked them what technologies they use for automation, because that might be relevant. But yeah, thank you so much for this feedback. And you had some good feedback on the clarifying the segregating the tasks more. Could you explain that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, and segregating by role. So, for example, a platform builder may, write operators or find kubectl plugins to install, or assemble a set of tools from the ecosystem, or write their own to fill the gaps and kind of glue all that together.
Mm-hmm.
They may use, like I said, Terraform to stamp out clusters and components in those clusters. So they have a set of tasks that they're trying to do to create a reproducible platform for all the different environments they have to manage for their application teams. So they may worry about multi-tenancy in Kubernetes, or backup and restore and those kinds of things. Whereas app teams, unless they also are own their own clusters entirely, they are probably more focused on application delivery, right? So like CI/CD and Helm, and dealing with the Kubernetes resources for service and ingress and deployment and those kinds of tasks. So they'll be releasing and deploying and promoting across environments, more of those types of things. So they're probably less likely to use Terraform and more likely to use Helm and customize.
I see.
Or more likely to use GitOps, right?
Yeah,
So I think segregating by role or by kind of umbrella task, like are you building a platform, are you deploying an application,
right,
can help figure out some useful distinctions between how people are using Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for mentioning that. We have one of the things that we added to the survey too is what's your job role? So that's definitely it builds on that, but I really also about the task too. What's your goal? So yeah, what's the task that you're primarily working on? So thank you so much.
Yeah, there are more titles now that existed in 2018 also. So I'm asking people what their job title is, I think could be interesting. Like platform engineering now is a more common term than it was 4 years ago.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I will reschedule our July call for a better week, just because of the 4th of July holiday, and look forward to reconnecting then. Yeah.
One last quick question that occurred to me: has SIG CLI expressed any interest in UX help? There was a mention that people couldn't remember the kubectl syntax, or that they found it unintuitive. I'm probably to blame for some of it, but the designing command line tools is very different than designing a graphical user interface in terms of the techniques to bring to bear. And actually, since Kubernetes started 9 years ago, other more modern CLIs have introduced techniques that weren't common back then. So yeah, I just wonder if it might be worth exploring ways that we could improve kubectl compatibility or usability. Compatibility is an issue for some automation, but there's probably things we could do for people who are using it interactively.
Yeah. I think we could definitely look at the feedback we're getting and try to pull it out for the various SIGs, and maybe then reach out to them to do a presentation or share the data.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, well, have a great week, everybody, and chat soon.
You too. Bye.
Bye.